QSO Today, episode 357, Greg Algieri, WA1JXR. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, thanking you for taking your ICOM transceiver into the field this weekend for Field Day. Get outside and under the stars with a new ICOM transceiver available from your local ICOM dealer. And by LDG Electronics, whose desktop antenna tuners are perfect for your ham radio shack or mobile. My thanks to ICOM America and LDG Electronics for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, 4Z1UG, your host. Greg Algieri, WA1JXR, began his ham radio journey by asking his dad for a Gillette Blue razor blade to make his first receiver, leading to amateur radio license, higher electronics education, and an entire career with Raytheon, where he worked in radio and antenna design. WA1JXR is active in his amateur radio community as a teacher of new and existing hams, restoring boat anchor vintage radios, and getting on the air. He is my guest in this QSO today. WA1JXR, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Greg?
4Z1UG, this is WA1JXR. Good evening, Eric.
Good morning, Greg. Thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Oh, let's see. So it started early on in my age, probably when I was like 12 years old or so. I started getting interested in electricity. I can remember going into the library in elementary school and looking at books that had information about the topic, and started playing around with dry cell batteries and winding wire around nails to create electromagnets and light bulbs and that kind of stuff. And then I happened to come across a book that had an article about something they called the foxhole radio. I found that very interesting, and so I started to we didn't have copy machines back then, so I carefully in the library would sit there and copy down all the information, and I started accumulating the bits and pieces that I needed for that. Had my mom save me the cardboard roll out of the wax paper, and I needed some wire, and so my dad, who worked in a textile mill, had brought home a piece of telephone trunk cable that had like number 26 wire in it, a whole bunch of probably 100 different pieces. And it was about, 3-4 feet long. So I cut that open and spliced all those pieces of wire together to get enough wire so I could wind the coil. I still remember asking my dad for a Gillette Blue razor blade. You can imagine a 12-year-old asking for that. But that was needed for the detector, right? Part of the radio. And anyways, I built the foxhole radio, and luckily we had a 1 kilowatt AM radio station in town. Threw a piece of wire out my bedroom window and was able to pick that up. And then I got interested. A couple friends of mine were Citizens Band radio operators. I got exposed to that, and got a little Citizens Band handy-talkie, and eventually a Citizens Band radio. And then there was a group of 3 of us kids that lived like within a couple block area that were all friends, and we were all interested in radio, and so at one point my dad was also kind of interested, but he never took it anywhere as far as getting into amateur radio or anything, but he was always interested. And one day he came home from work with a shortwave receiver. It was an old Hallicrafters S38. And we set that up, hooked it up to a long wire antenna I had running out of my bedroom window, and started listening around and listened, of course, to AM broadcast band. But I came across, the ham bands and started to hear people talking on there. And one of the friends in the area, Dad worked with someone who was a ham radio operator. So his dad introduced us three kids to this fellow. His name was Harold Rathman, K1 Zanzibar Nancy Queen, who, of course, is a silent key now. But Harold kind of took us kids under his wing and took us over to his he was civil defense director for the radio equipment in the next town over, and he took us three kids over to the basement of the town hall where they had the civil defense radio set up, and I still remember it. It was quite the. Of course, this was back in the mid '60s.
What was the hometown, Greg?
So hometown for me was Westerly, Rhode Island, right down in the southwest corner of the state, right on the ocean.
And Harold was in what town?
He was in Pawcatuck, Connecticut.
That's easy to spell, right?
Right. Even funnier than that, he was originally in Pawcatuck, but then moved out to a plot of land in the next town over from that, where his parents had lived after they passed away. And the name of that town was Wickety-Quack. Yeah, the old Indian names.
So Harold got you three interested in ham radio?
Yep, he got us three interested in amateur radio, and he was conducting a class. So the three of us joined his class. They would meet once a week at the basement of a town hall there in the civil defense radio room, and he taught us Morse code and took us through the the technical part of it, the questions and so forth.
This is a technical part of the novice license?
Yes, it was. Yep.
Did the three of you actually go and get the novice license then?
Actually, two of us did. One of the kids kind of fell off. He kind of lost interest and never carried it through. But two of us did. We took. Harold set us up with another guy who was gave the novice tests, and another ham in town, and the two of us got our novice class licenses. So I was WN1JXR at that point, and my friend Tom was he took his a little later than mine, so he was WN1KEF.
When was that, and how old were you?
That was 1967, so I guess I was 15.
So what was the novice rig?
So my first station, I started out with that S38 receiver. Took me a while before I actually got a transmitter, but I happened to run across, we used to go down to the local newsstand and look at magazines and stuff. I believe it was in March of '68. Popular Electronics came out with a magazine that had an article in it, and it was called The Bare Essentials Transmitter. It was written by a ham W5LET. I still remember that call sign. And it was a one-tube transmitter that you could build basically on a pine board. And it was very minimalist in nature, so that was right up our alley since we didn't have a lot of funds. and so I ended up building that that transmitter, it used a 50C5 tube, which was the audio output tube that many of the all American 5 receivers used, and had to wind the coil, and I built it on a pine board. Or the article was very good. It showed you, where to place everything and where to put the nails, and it was so minimalist that it didn't even use a power transformer. It took the AC line and ran it into a voltage doubler rectifier circuit so that you could get about 300 volts or so for the plate of the tube. And so part of the circuit was it had a point where they wanted you to connect it to a ground, like a cold water pipe or something. You could pick up a ground reference, and it had a neon bulb. And what you did is you plug the transmitter in, and if the neon bulb lit, it meant that you had the plug in the wrong way. So you flipped the plug around, and then the neon bulb lit. And what this meant is you didn't have, line voltage across the key.
Well, I think the younger listeners may not know that at one time, at least I think this changed in the 70s, but most houses, electric plugs only had 2 prongs.
Exactly.
And maybe one prong happened to be a little bit wider if you had to put the plug in a certain way.
Right.
Yeah, that was very clever, a neon bulb for that.
Yep.
So here you are with this rig. How did that rig work?
So it worked fairly well, but, it only put out like 5 to 8 watts. It would work on 80 or 40. And, of course, the S38 receiver was okay, but it was a very, very broad bandwidth. The selectivity was not very good at all, and the BFO didn't work all that great. So anyways, I had a paper route at the time, and I saved up my money from my paper route and purchased from the Heathkit catalog, I purchased the HW16 novice transceiver that operated the 3 novice bands, 80, 40, and 15 meters. And I built that kit, and boy, what a step up that was. It the receiver was optimized for CW. It had a 500 hertz crystal filter, so it was very nice. And of course, the transmitter would put out up to 90 watts, and it had a way that you could adjust the power. At the time, the novice power limit was 75 watts input. That really made a huge difference, and I immediately started working the world.
So here you are. You have 3 bands, 80, 40, and 15, as I recall. I had the same transceiver. Did you become a DXer, contester? What did you do with that radio?
I've never, and even to this day, if a DX station came up as I was listening around, I would certainly, try to contact them. I was not a contester by any means. I think I operated the Novice Roundup contest or operating event, but I was not really a contester. I'm not that mindset. No, for me it was just getting on the air and having casual QSOs.
Okay, so here you are. You're a 15, 16-year-old ham radio operator with a novice license. I think in those days you actually had to upgrade in the year or lose the license. Isn't that right?
That is correct. Yeah, my novice license was only good for 1 year.
So what did you do?
So I used to get on the air quite a bit. Often, I would get on before going to school. I'd get on and make a QSO, and then of course when I came home from school, often I'd make one or more QSOs before or after dinner. So I was fairly active on the air. So my code speed, really went up as I operated quite a bit. So I had no problem getting up to the 13 words per minute, which was the requirement for the general class license. And then we continued to study for the general exam. I had the license manuals, and as I had questions, my Elmer Harold would, help me out and so forth. And Harold would also take us kids. There was a local radio club called the Tri-City Amateur Radio Club. And Harold would come pick Tom and I up and take us over to the meetings. The meetings ran once a month. And, getting exposed to other hams and so forth really helped a lot, too.
And now this message from ICOM America. Field Day is just around the corner, June 26th and June 27th. ICOM has the Field Day base station of your dreams with the ICOM IC7300HF and the ICOM IC9700 VHF-UHF SDR transceivers, and the new portable all-band SDR transceiver, the ICOM IC705. These top-of-the-line transceivers are the choice of DXers and contesters across the globe because they cut through pile-ups, letting you work all the bands and record those contacts. ICOM radios will make you the field day leader. Hear it, worked it, logged it. The ICOM IC7300 is a high-performance, innovative HF transceiver with a compact design that will far exceed your expectations. This innovative HF transceiver digitizes RF before various receiver stages to reduce the generated inherent noise in different IF stages. The IC7300 is the radio that changed the way entry-level HF is designed. I myself have the IC7300, and I love it. It has RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, and an SD card memory slot. The real fun of HF starts here. Create your own band opening with the ICOM IC9700. This transceiver brings direct sampling to the UHF-VHF weak signal world. This all-band transceiver is loaded with innovative features that are sure to keep you busy. A 4.3 touchscreen color TFT LCD with real-time high-speed spectrum scope and waterfall display. Smooth satellite operation with 99 satellite channels. Dual watch operation and full duplex operation in satellite mode. Expect top performance on field day with the ICOM's IC9700. Finally, the ICOM IC705 is the perfect transceiver for hams who enjoy both the great outdoors and indoors on field day. It's the perfect QRP companion. This base station has features and functionality at the tip of your fingers in a portable package covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. It weighs in under 2 pounds. It also has a 4.3-inch touchscreen with live band scope and waterfall display, 5 watts with the BP272 battery pack, and 10 watts if you hook it up to 13.8 volts DC. Single sideband CW, AM, and FM, as well as full D-Star functions, micro USB connector, Bluetooth, wireless LAN, and the micro SD card slot. Integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger. The HM243 speaker microphone comes standard equipment. The perfect accessory for the IC705 is the optional backpack, the LC192, with its special compartment for your IC705 and room for accessories for soda activations, contesting, or a day in the park, maybe not social distancing. Of course, you can find out more information about these amazing ICOM transceivers by visiting ICOM America's website at www.icomamerica.com/amateur or by visiting one of ICOM's dealers near you. And when you go to buy your new ICOM transceiver, tell your dealer that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO. As an aside here, because we're talking about CW a little bit, one of the things when you learn how to sing, there's this break between the chest voice and the head voice that males have mostly. I guess baritones may have them more than maybe tenors. But there's also seems to be this break between the way that we learned CW in those days, where we would hear the letters and we would write them down.
Yep.
And getting your speed up to a point where you're no longer writing it down, but you're actually starting to hear words. How did that break happen for you?
I do remember that. Yeah, I think there tends to be like a plateau at some point where I think, getting over that break is something that I think just requires a lot of practice. And I think maybe a little bit of courage on the part of the operator to kind of get away from that crutch of writing every single character down and doing what we call now head copy, where you try to just, relax, sit back and listen and try to make it more into a, language rather than a, operation of, listening to each single character. And then, of course, learning to recognize groups of characters, especially common ones like, and the and things like that.
73.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, I hear that a lot on the air. I just finished a CW Academy class. It's very different from the way I learned it almost 50 years ago. So I thought that was interesting, and I'm glad to know that you remember where that crossover point was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did ham radio play a part in the choices that you made for your education and career?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it did. So, of course, being interested in, radio and electronics sort of set me down that interest path. I was fortunate, I think when I was in ninth grade in high school, our town had just joined a regional school system, and that regional school system had just built a new vocational school. And I found out that they offered classes in electronics. And so I said, wow, this is something I'm interested in. So I signed up for it. And so for my 10th, 11th, and 12th year in high school, I transferred over to one of the other regional schools that had the VOTEC and took classes there.
Did that lead to a decision to actually go into electronics as a career?
Well, yes, it did. I was fortunate. The first teacher that we had, he was more of an electrician, I think, than anything else, but he only taught for 1 year. And then they brought in another person. I still remember his name. He was a retired lieutenant commander out of the Navy. His name was Joseph P. Norris, and he was really good teacher. And I think he recognized in me that I had interest and possibly some talent in the area. And I remember my senior year, he kind of pulled me aside and said, what are your plans for after high school? And I didn't really know. I mean, both of my parents were, just working class folks. Neither of them went to college. In fact, I think one of my parents never even finished high school, which was common in those days. I didn't really understand college or what that was all about. So anyways, he coached me a little bit and said, because as far as I was concerned, I wanted to be a, TV repairman or something. But he said, well, have you considered going to this? And back in those days, they didn't call them community colleges. They called them junior colleges. So he set me up with Rhode Island Junior College, helped me fill out the application, and I got accepted. And so I went to Rhode Island Junior College for 2 years, got an associate's degree, and did really well there. I was in the honors program there, and so at that point I decided that I wanted to continue on. So I was able to transfer those credits over to the University of Rhode Island and got into their electrical engineering program. Got my bachelor's degree, and in my junior year, I think, or maybe it was the end of the sophomore year, I was doing well there. I was in the honors program there. The electrical engineering department had started up a new thing for honor students where you could not only, take your classes, but they were also working with industry in the area, sponsoring students to co-op with industry as part of their curriculum. So I was able to get into that program. I worked for one summer and then one semester for the Naval Electronic Security Engineering Center in Washington, D.C. And that was very informative. It gave me a taste of what a career in electrical engineering would be like, and I think it helped me figure out what classes I wanted to take in my, junior and senior year, which of course were the more focused, classes.
And did you have a specialty then in those last 2 years?
Yeah, of course we had a range of classes, as most electrical engineering curriculums do. And I always had an affinity for the more analog stuff. Of course we took digital stuff, but for me, analog was the way. So I focused in on those areas, and specifically, probably due to my ham radio background, RF, analog, and RF kind of stuff was what I was interested in. So I focused my courses mainly in those areas.
And where did you go from there?
So I went through. I got the bachelor's degree. At the end of one semester, I was one course short of getting my master's, and I thought, geez, rather than stick around and for a whole nother semester, I decided to take some interviews because I did have the bachelor's degree, and take some interviews, and then maybe pick up that last course that I needed nights or whatever. So anyways, I interviewed with a few different companies, got three or four offers, but one of the companies I interviewed with was Raytheon Company up in Massachusetts here. I was very impressed by the interview. We first did a phone interview, and then I came up and did a in-person. I think it just fit into my wheelhouse because when I went up for the interview, or they took me to departments within the company that had names like receiver department and transmitter department and antenna department and signal processing department.
Felt like home already.
Yeah, right. It's like holy mackerel. This just fits right in.
Yeah. So did you take the job there?
Yes, I did. So 1977, I accepted a job with Raytheon in Sudbury, Massachusetts. I moved up, got an apartment in the next town over. Started working for them. I at the same time found out that not too far away in Worcester, Massachusetts, was Worcester Polytechnic Institute, which is a very well-known school. And they had the same exact course, last course that I needed to finish up my master's degree, which was random variables and stochastic processes. And so I took that course nights, and even better, Raytheon paid for it. So I finished that off and was able to transfer those credits to URI and got my master's the next year.
Well, I actually wrote down random variables and stochastic processes just so that we can look it up in the show notes page. Did you end up getting that MSCE from Worcester, or did you apply that back to Rhode Island?
No, I applied that back to Rhode Island. I think they allowed you to transfer one or two courses toward their degree program. And so, yeah, both of the degrees ended up coming from URI.
So I'm assuming that you're a little bit older than I am. So at this point in your life, you've run your full career, perhaps. Are you still working?
No, I am not. I worked for Raytheon Company for 42 years, and I just retired at the end of 2019.
And were you an active ham radio operator all this time?
Yes, I have been.
What's the current rig?
So, it's more like current rigs. The newest radio that I have is an Elecraft K3, and it's not all that new anymore, but it's probably the newest technology radio that I have. But I have a plethora of radios. A bunch of the guys in the club joke when we talk about going to flea markets and stuff, and they joke at me and say, well, you don't need to go to a flea market. All you need to do is walk down in the basement.
Let me take a quick break to tell you about my favorite amateur radio audio podcast, and that's the Ham Radio Workbench podcast with George, KJ6VU, Jeremy, KF7IJZ, and it now includes Michael Walker, VA3MW, where they pursue topics, technology, and projects on their ham radio workbenches every 2 weeks. The group documents their projects and makes circuit boards available to their listeners. They have interesting guests and go in deep. Jeremy may complain about the overall length of the podcast, but friends, let me tell you that I could listen to it all day, and that's good. Even if you are a seasoned ham radio builder or just getting started, be sure to join George, Jeremy, and Mike now for the Ham Radio Workbench podcast on every podcast player. Use the link on this week's show notes page by clicking on the image. A new way to show your support of the QSO Today podcast is to buy me a coffee. I consume gallons of coffee to create this weekly podcast. Invite me for coffee by pushing the yellow button, Buy Me a Coffee, on the QSO Today show notes page. And now back to our QSO Today. So let's talk about that a little bit. Now, the reason that you chose the Elecraft K3 is because your favorite operating mode is
CW.
Right, and the K3 was designed by CW operators.
Yes.
Right, so I guess that makes a lot of logical sense. But it seems to me that if we walk down in your basement, do you have any other operating positions put together with the other gear that you have?
Yeah, so the main shack down in the basement I have the K3 set up there. I also have an older transceiver, the Kenwood TS940, which was top of the line rig that Kenwood had, probably back in the 80s, 90s time frame. I just love that radio. It's really easy to use. It works very, very well, and I still have that. But along with that, I have a bunch of boat anchor rigs, I call them. I have an E.F. Johnson Viking 2 transmitter. I have a Collins 75A4 receiver. I have a Collins R390 military receiver. I have another E.F. Johnson CW only transmitter, and I'm blanking on the name. I think it might be Challenger or something. I forget now. But I have a whole bunch of other rigs, and of course the antenna tuners and all that stuff. I have one HF antenna, basically. It's a wire antenna. It's 2 half waves in phase on 80 meters, or often referred to as an extended double ZEP. And it gives about 3 dB more gain than a regular half wave dipole. And I feed that with a 600 ohm balance line right into the shack in the basement where I have a tuner, and I can tune that on any band from 1.8 to 30 megs.
And are you using it like a Johnson Matchbox for that?
So for many years I used a Heathkit SA2060, which was a copy of the Lou McCoy Ultimate Transmatch, which was in the ARRL handbook for years and years and years. And then I picked up a Palstar AT5K, and I used that for a number of years. And then now just recently, I've replaced that with a Palstar HF Auto automatic tuner, mainly because I set up a Studio B upstairs because there's no heat in the basement, and in the winter it gets a little chilly down there. It wasn't too bad. Used to be not too bad, but I upgraded my furnace a few years ago, and I have this highly efficient furnace now that doesn't give off any extra heat, so it gets a little chilly down in the basement. So I set up the Studio B upstairs, and up there I have a Ten-Tec. Oh boy, I'm blanking on the name. A Ten-Tec transceiver. I have a E.F. Johnson Ranger 2 transmitter. I have a Collins 75A4 receiver. I have a Collins 75S1 receiver. I have a shortwave, a Kenwood R2000 just for solid state shortwave listening. Oh, and then I also just picked up a K7DYY Class D full legal limit amplitude modulated transmitter. I like getting on amplitude modulation, and so I have fun with that.
So you join the guys on 80 meters late at night on Talk on AM?
Yes, I do.
What receiver do you use with that?
Well, normally the Collins 75A4 or the 75S1.
I'll put a link to that in the show notes so that people can see what a K7 DYY Class D AM transmitter looks like. Does it have beautiful tubes in it?
Actually, it's all solid state. It weighs it's not a boat anchor. It weighs about 10 pounds. And it's made to mount in a rack, so it's 19 inches wide. And it's about 5U high, so it's only about, 4.5, 5 inches high. And the thing is just amazing. You get full 1,500 watts PEP out. It operates from a standard 120 volt 15 amp outlet because the Class D amplifiers in there are about 95% efficient. And so it's very high efficiency. You don't need 240 volt line to even drive it. It's all solid state, and it sounds wonderful.
I have the perfect product for you. This is a product idea that I'll send out to the listeners, is why not use a Raspberry Pi with the HDMI video output, put a screen in the rack that looks like glowing transmitter tubes.
There you go.
That modulates with the AM, so you actually see them, and then people looking from afar will think that you've got the real deal there. Well, that sounds really cool. I mean, that sounds like an amazing setup. And, of course, you've got perhaps a vintage microphone that you use with AM?
Yeah, I use the vintage, Lollipop D104 microphone with it, yes.
One of the things I read about, you sent me some notes, and I appreciate it, and I also saw them in QRZ, is that you're the trustee of the local repeater. So you don't limit yourself to CW and AM. You, in fact, may in the car operate FM as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have a duo band rig in the car. That was when I was commuting to and from work. I often had a half hour to 45-minute drive, so having the 2-meter FM in the car, was really nice. We had a group that used to get on every morning and every afternoon during commuting hours, and it really helped pass the time as you drove along.
Are you involved in MCOM or ARES?
Not heavily, but I am. I have helped out with RACES and ARES in the area from time to time.
How important is club membership to you as a ham operator?
I think it's very important. I recommend it. I've done a lot of teaching classes. So the local club that I'm part of here is called Central Mass Amateur Radio Association, CMARA, as we go by. And I've been a member of that club since probably the mid-'80s. And I'm on the board of directors for the club, and have sort of been their de facto education committee chair. So I've given a lot of classes over the years for new hams, licensing classes. I've taught CW both at classes and even ran CW classes on the repeater. And I highly recommend when I run across new hams or whatever that they find a local club in their area and sign up and become a member, because I think having that camaraderie and exposure to the experience of other hams, really goes a long way.
How did Central Mass Amateur Radio Association handle the COVID pandemic?
So, once COVID hit, of course, we weren't having in-person meetings anymore, but I'm actually the host for them. We purchased a Zoom account, the club did, and we have been holding our regular monthly meetings and our board of directors meetings on Zoom now.
And as things start to loosen up, do you see that everyone will get together again? And do you think that you'll retain a Zoom portion of the club meetings?
Yeah, so we just had a Zoom a board of directors meeting on Tuesday, and of course, field day coming up. The club did not operate a field day last year, but they are planning on holding a field day this year, although maybe somewhat reduced from what we normally did. And we talked about so we take July and August off. We do not hold club meetings those 2 months. But we start back up in September, and the plan is, if everything looks good, is to go back to in-person meetings as of our September meeting. But the plan is to also set up a Zoom streaming function at the meeting, so for people who can't or don't desire to do the in-person thing yet, they'll still be able to go to the meeting on Zoom.
Did your club membership increase as a result of being on Zoom, doing it virtually?
I think it may have actually, because we do seem to have our membership runs, from January to or December. So we just went through a new season of signing members up, and we are having a record year. We have close to 90 members, I think, signed up now. So I don't know if it's been mainly of Zoom or not, but it has been a good year for that.
Maybe it allows alumni who've moved away to come back.
Yeah, we do have a few of those, yes.
How important is belonging to organizations like the Straight Key Century Club or FIS, clubs that are maybe more international than local or regional?
I think it's important. I do belong to both of those clubs, SKCC and FIS. A club that I recently got involved with probably 6 months or so ago is the Long Island CW Club. Great club. They started out as a CW club of guys in the Long Island area, and they've just blossomed to this now international club. I think they have, a few thousand members now, but they do an absolute amazing job of everything they do is on Zoom, and they hold all kinds of classes, both starting with the beginner classes for being able to increase your speed, being able to do head copy, classes on keys and sending, but they've also branched into all other kinds of topics. And in fact, I am involved with 2 of the forums. On Monday nights at 7 p.m., I hold a class called The Doctor Is In Forum, and it's mainly a question and answer class. People come with questions, especially new hams, and we help them out with, any questions they may have, whether it be radios, antennas, whatever it is, circuits or whatever. And then I'm also a co-host for the Antenna Forum that happens on Sunday mornings, where we have guest speakers come in and speak about different types of antennas and question and answers on the antennas and transmission lines and those kind of things.
And now this message from LDG Electronics. LDG Electronics, our new sponsor, is a family-owned company that manufactures sophisticated antenna tuners, balun, and antenna accessories. Check out their new Z100A antenna tuner for your shack or portable operation that includes LDG's famous 10-to-1 tuning and plug-and-play operation. For more information, click on the banner in this week's show notes page. And when you make your LDG purchase, tell them that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO. So one of the reasons that we're talking now is because you actually are going to be a speaker. You're going to do 2 presentations at the next QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo in August. Your talks are Introduction to Antenna Modeling Using EasyNIC and Introduction to the Nano VNA Vector Network Analyzer, which I think are both amazing opportunities to hear about antenna modeling and then using a network analyzer maybe to look at your antenna or look at the coils that you're winding that may go at the bottom. How much time do you actually spend modeling antennas? And do you think that some of the new designs that we have that are quite kind of wacky, like the hex beam, for example, is a result of being able to model an antenna on a computer before actually building it?
Yeah, I think that might be the case. I mean, because before we had antenna modeling capability, I mean, all you could really do was go out in the backyard and, set different things up and, try them out. And you had to basically just rely on, on the air reports and so forth like that. I mean, for people who are really serious, I guess you could go around with a field strength meter and try to see what the, what the actual fields look like. But today, of course, with the antenna modeling is you can basically model the antenna and then, take a look at the azimuth and elevation patterns, look at the gain, look at the impedance at the feed point, and do all the sort of what ifs, what happens if I move this or if I change this length or whatever. So it's really a great tool.
Do you think that maybe amateur radio operators, even maybe antenna designers, carried perhaps the wrong physics until antenna modeling, and then for some reason antenna modeling actually showed them that perhaps what they were assuming was wrong? I
don't know. I mean, there might have been some of that. There's always, talking about antennas is, it's kind of like, talking about snake oil. But, there's always a lot of opinions and interpretations around, and some of them are correct and some of them are wrong. So,
as I was thinking about that question, I'm thinking that an antenna like EasyNIC would be taking all those assumptions over 100 years of building antennas, perhaps, and combining them with Maxwell's equations and what we know about antennas and antenna theory. So maybe it's possible that the models also carry along our old assumptions. Yeah,
it could be. Of course, the models are just mainly math, driven. So I'm not sure. But the one thing about EasyNIC that I found or the modeling thing, is that you actually learn a lot about antennas because, you can, like, if you just take a simple dipole, for example, and you model that and you start playing around with the height above ground, you immediately see, the ground effects and how that changes what the patterns look like. Or, EasyNIC actually allows you to change the type of ground you have. You can model it in free space with no ground. You can model it with what they call a perfect ground, a ground with no loss. Or you can model it with a typical ground that has a certain amount of loss. And by doing that, you can see, how all those things affect how your antenna works. So not only do you get to model it, but I think it really helps the learning and the understanding of how things really work.
One of the things I did a couple of years ago, I went to Pacificon, and they had an whole day of antenna workshop on the day before the thing started. And they had a panel at the very end, after you're listening to everybody talk about different kinds of antennas, and they asked just about everybody what their preferred antenna was. And it sounded to me like they all preferred a dipole as high as possible, as long as possible, with a balanced feed line and an antenna tuner at the bottom. It seems to me that that's kind of where you've ended up. Is that because of the property that you're on, or is it because after all of this life working with antennas and transmitters and stuff, that extended doubles up with an antenna tuner at the bottom is the best antenna to be on all bands?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it, Eric, is the ZEP antenna, or the doublet as they used to call it in the early days of radio. First of all, most of the transmitters back then were not unbalanced coaxial outputs. They were balanced because the output transforming network in the amplifier was what's called a link-coupled network. So it was a balanced output, which matched up exactly to, balanced line. And so they use that antenna quite a bit. And it turns out a wire antenna fed with balanced line to a tuner is probably the most efficient single antenna you can have. And part of that is because the losses in balanced line at HF frequencies are almost so low that you can hardly measure them. They're, fractions of a dB. So this makes for a very efficient antenna system overall.
And we're going to save the Nano VNA, talking about that. We're going to save that for your presentation in August. I can't wait to see that. I've got one of those in the drawers here that I think that I'd like to play with. What's the project on your workbench today?
Let's see. Well, it just so happens the project on my workbench today, just a little simple box. It's just a steel box. I'm using Greenlee punches to punch out 2.5, 3 inch holes. I picked up two analog meters. One measures AC voltage, and the other one measures AC current. And I'm going to install them in the box, and then have 2 pigtail leads that come out of each side. One is a male AC wall plug, and the other one is a female AC wall plug. And just as a box that if I'm taking some AC operated device and I want to just see what the voltage is, make sure the voltage is up where it should be, and see how much current this device draws, I can easily insert this little box in the AC line cord and see what's going on. It's also very useful with the old boat anchor rigs. If you're starting to restore those and you're bringing it up for the first time, you don't really want to apply full 120 volts line voltage to it, because one of the filter capacitors could be old and shorted out, and that could take the power transformer out. And so you want to bring it up slowly. So you typically use a variac, which brings the voltage up. But what I like to do is bring the variac voltage up and then look at the current and see what the current is. If I brought the voltage up to, let's say, 30 volts or so, and I know nominally this piece of equipment should be drawing about 5 amps, and I bring it up to like 30 volts, and I already see 3 amps or something, then that's an indication to me that something wrong here. I don't want to bring this voltage up anymore, because I'm going to end up, damaging something. So that's where I would dig in and start to replace capacitors and things.
So if you have Greenlee punches, it means that you may have a metal shop, or do you just have Greenlee punches and a hacksaw and a hand drill?
Yeah, that's exactly what I have. No, I don't have a metal shop. In fact, we were commenting not too long ago in one of the club Zoom meetings is you can really tell that I'm an electrical engineer and not a mechanical engineer, because many of my projects turn out to be circuit boards with a bunch of flying leads and connectors, but they never end up in a case.
I would imagine that when it involves perhaps a lot of things mechanical, I have the same issue, as there's blood on all my projects.
Yep, absolutely.
You miss with the drill and it goes right through your finger.
I do enjoy working on mechanical things, though. I enjoy working on my car, and I just had a barn built about 1.5 years ago, and has enough room for 4 cars in there. And one of the bays I installed a automotive lift, because I still like to work on my own cars.
And you could work on other people's cars. Are you finding that you can still work on cars? I look under the hood with all of the juice cans painted black and all the other stuff. It's hard for me to know what's under there.
Yeah, that is true. It is definitely harder to work on a car these days. Well, you almost need a scope and a digital analyzer versus the old, timing light and dwell meter that we used to use back in the points days.
Right, the Heath kit.
Yes, I had one.
Do you have a car collection? Do you have something exotic in your garage?
No, unfortunately, it's just a Toyota Prius and a Subaru Outback. But no, I've always wanted a European sports car like an MGB or a Triumph Spitfire or something back in the day. But these days, if I get anything, and I keep eyeing the Mazda Miatas look really nice, yeah.
And they're actually, I think, they're holding their value.
Yes.
Because they seem to be a sought-after car.
Yep.
What do you think the greatest challenge is facing amateur radio now, from your perspective?
I think one of the greatest challenges is getting new people, younger people, into the hobby. Of course, back when I started out, there was no cell phones, there was no worldwide communications available at your fingertips. So, the lure of amateur radio and being able to talk around the world and all that kind of stuff was a big lure, in addition to the technical side of things. Of course, today, that isn't there as much because, kids today can pick up their cell phone and they can talk all around the world or get on the internet and communicate all around the world. So,
as a ham radio instructor and leader of your radio clubs, do you have a prescription? Is there a way that the community can approach kids and make it interesting?
Well, I think so. I mean, we try to expose kids in the 12 to 14-year-old age. I mean, they're old enough to understand some of what's going on, but yet they may not be preoccupied with other things in life that happen when you become an older teen. Expose them to amateur radio and some of the fun things you can have, and try to incorporate some of the things that are more technically relevant and fit into what the newer generation has. Like, for example, the new digital modes and being able to talk to the space station and, things of that nature.
What excites you most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
Well, I think one of the things that continues to excite me is it's a great hobby. There are an opportunity to meet wonderful people and share a common interest. It's something that I've enjoyed all my life, and I'm hoping, and part of what I do with the classes and stuff is to try to give a little bit back to the hobby and help others become part of the hobby as well.
Do you have advice that you'd give to newer returning hams?
I don't think so. One nice thing about ham radio is there are so many facets to it. There are so many different, niches within it. CW operators, phone operators, digital. Some guys are into, satellites, Earth, Moon, Earth. There's just so many different facets that take a look at everything, and there's probably something in there that ticks a checkbox for you,
Greg, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. This was enlightening. I, at some point, would love to walk through your basement and see all the stuff that's down there. What new thing needs to be put on the bench and restored?
Well, very good, Eric. I've enjoyed chatting with you, and I thank you for having me on the QSO Today podcast as a guest.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I'm, again, asking everyone to make sure that they check out your 2 presentations at the next QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo. With that, 73.
7 threes.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Greg. Be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in W1JXR in the search box at the top of the page. Be sure to click on the Expo menu item at the top of the page for updates on the upcoming QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo that will return in August. I'm updating it as I have more information. My thanks to ICOM America for its support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of ICOM America by clicking on their banner in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any other episode into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages, or use my Amazon link before shopping at Amazon. Amazon gives me a small commission on your purchases while at the same time protecting your privacy. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as I head towards episode 400. QSO Today is now available in the iHeart Radio, Spotify, YouTube, and a bunch of other online audio services, including the iTunes Store. Look on the right side of the show notes pages for a listing of these services. You can use the Amazon Echo and say, "Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn." My thanks to Ben Bresky, who edits every single show and allows both this host and my guest to sound brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Until next time, this is Eric, 4Z1UG, 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.